Rightio, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Science of Fitness podcast. This is the first of a new little series Joey and I are going to be working on. We're calling it the SOF Monthly, and we're essentially just going to catch up every month and talk about a couple of things that have been going on from within the business through to the industry, our clients, our training, and everything in between. So not too long an episode, but hopefully insightful for those out there. And more than anything, I think the lessons and trends and things that we see and learn, and hopefully people can sort of absorb information from us so that they don't make the same mistakes. So to kick things off today, Joey, how you going?
I'm well, brother.
That's
how are you?
good. Yeah, very well, mate. Full of beans. As a structure, the first thing I want to always talk about, which I think we get questioned a lot about, is trends within the industry. So, we can probably talk about 100 different trends. You're going to pick one, and then I'm going to pick one, and let's unpack it as to why it's trending and whether it has legs, whether it's worth worrying about, whether it's going to be put in the bin in a couple of months or whatever else. So, mate, you're going to kick things off. Of late, what's the big trend you've seen, and let's unpack it.
Hybrid athlete.
Okay, that's been going for a little while. Let's talk through that. First of all, how would it be defined in accordance with the trend? How would you define it at least?
I would define hybrid athlete as literally being athletic.
Yep.
And I would define being athletic as being able to lift something, run half well, and generally be able to step in at any activity at a semi-mediocre level. So, for example, I can lift, I can go for a run, I can go for a swim, and I can do it any day of the week.
Okay, cool. And so you say, lift and run half decently. Let's put a few numbers behind what would probably be considered appropriate from a lifting perspective, for example. So, what do you mean by that in terms of strength and numbers that someone might be, let's say a male, pushing in the weight room or a female in the weight room?
Yep, okay. So let's say a bloke who's around 80 to 90 kilos, they can squat their body weight 10 times. So it's not super heavy, not super strong, but strong enough. I would say they can run, give or take, 4:45 to 5:15 pace for 5 to 8K. And then they can, perform a high intensity class and come, first to fifth in the class without completely gassing themselves with the carry on at the end of the class. So they can hit their strength and aerobic work, they can hit their volume work running, and then they can perform a hit-based session all throughout the week without being completely wrecked at the end of the week.
Okay, so, it takes a little bit to sort of get to that level from a training perspective. What type of, person is getting into this position? Why are we seeing this trend exist, in your opinion?
In my opinion, I think a lot of people go through weight training and get to a point where it becomes boring. And I believe the reason it becomes boring is chasing either the bodybuilding route, so as much muscle as possible,
and an aesthetic outcome.
Or the powerlifting route, as much weight on the bar as possible, becomes almost daunting and unachievable and somewhat boring.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a lot of risk involved with really going after a heavy deadlift, squat, bench press. A lot of injury associated with it for those that have pushed that envelope. And, if you just want to be fit and healthy, it's probably at some point when you hurt your back 6 times or, you blow a pec, you're going, maybe this isn't quite worth another 1.25 kilos on my max.
Yeah, 100%. And then on the other side, running 3 times a week can be quite boring in itself. And I think people just want to be able to say they can do anything, having that freedom, that variety to be able to engage socially with whatever activity their friends are saying, let's do it. So, from a traditional sense, lifting gets boring after a while, particularly for a guy who's going through their 20s, 30s, 40s. And socially, a lot of friends are looking at different things for a lot of different reasons. And our social interaction is often linked with exercise, particularly for us. So I don't want to say no to a mate catching up over, call it a run. So by default, I have to get better at running.
Yeah.
And, off the back of COVID and blah, 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 people want to spend more time in person and together. And that just happens to be running, swimming, those sorts of things. So fast forward a few years, what have we done? We've gamified it. We've added money to it. We've created sponsorships around it. People earn income from it now, and it's just the next trend.
Yeah, and that's sort of where it's at. And I think it's interesting to sort of see, as you said, that there's that degree of anyone who's kind of active. There's ceilings everywhere in terms of what the body can handle, and then when you get kind of, for lack of a better term, humbled back to something like, I've been really strong and I didn't really run that well. Did a lot of our primal and conditioning work and whatever else, and then went back about 3-4 years ago. Just got back into running, and the first run I did was a 10K run, and I was in bits, and it was super hard, and I was just so annoyed that I'd let myself get to that point, because I used to do a very fast 5K at one point in my life, and that was it for me. It was enough information to go, okay, don't ever lose this again, and so worst case scenario, I'll run once a week. But yeah, it's interesting that a lot of people have moved in that direction. I think other things that have brought it to the light, or to the forefront in terms of the healthy populations, and our industry in general, is the zone 2 information. People want to get that aerobic fix, but they don't want to be the skinny marathon runner. So there's that element, and then I think we come at it with a biased lens from a male perspective. But if you look at the female population, what's motivating them? I think there's a big shift to women being strong and females being stronger. So they've probably dominated the aerobic type training for 20 odd years, and all of a sudden, since 2020, literally, there's been that shift of, let's get stronger and actually have a sense of physicality and be proud of being strong and having muscle. And it's not going to make you look like a bloke and too bulky, but balance it, with the aerobic stuff as well. So, I guess pros and cons really quickly for this hybrid athlete trend. You mentioned gamifying it. I'm sure you're referencing Hyrox as a competition, but removing the competition, we can talk about Hyrox in its own right at some point. In terms of pros and cons about the hybrid type training and athlete, as you're saying, what are some of the cons?
Some of the cons around the hybrid is, like triathlon it takes a lot of time, and you can't avoid the time, unfortunately. You have to lift weights 3 to 4 times a week. You have to do your running, 1 to 3 times a week. You have to do your HIIT-based stuff, 1 to 2 times a week. So just by nature, that's already 7 to 9 sessions a week, full stop. So if you're only training 1 to 3 times, you're just not going to cut it. Usually that means that the gym that you go to needs to have all those services available. Or if they don't, you need to find alternates to that, run clubs, social clubs, equipment. So that can be costly or timely, or both. There's the skill element involved, where if you're not capable or competent enough at the skill, so in lifting, it might be a technical thing, it might be time under a certain weight or sets and reps. If you haven't run at a certain speed for X amount of time, there's all the injury associations. There's the weekly combination of all the things put together over time, which often causes breakdown. When you do all those things for a long period of time, you need to eat more food, sleep a little bit more, decrease your stress to be able to handle the tolerance and the load. And it's just more taxing. I mean, they're all good stresses, but it's still just more taxing.
Yeah. And it's probably something people don't consider when they're training. That last point that you raised, that pretty much contributes to the other 2 or 3 cons, as you mentioned. Time being a big thing, skill, being able to handle and I suppose execute the complexity of a 10K run from a skill perspective, and lifting a heavy weight, or even smashing yourself in a high intensity interval training class, and then even before that, as you said, it's that how much is in your cup already. If you're working a lot, if you've got other family commitments and other stressors in your life, and then suddenly you go and train like this, something's got to give. So it's either one of those factors, but you try and squeeze the lemon, you might just squeeze it too hard and end up breaking it. So yeah, it's a very important point that I think people need to consider when they are trying to cover all bases, is 1, why, and then 2, what are you committing to it? And then, 3, are you managing your load? And it's something that people often forget about, is you can't just go up and up and up and up and up and up in 12 weeks and 24 weeks and 32 weeks, just keep putting more stress on the system. You need to have that deload, which is probably the number 1 recommendation. From a pros perspective, what would you say the pros are of, I guess this being a trend and influencing people's decision when it comes to training?
You're going to feel a lot better. And that can be because of confidence. That can be because of self-image. That can be because of all the physicality and the, physical improvements that you have, whether it be body fat, muscle mass, weight, whatever it might be. So there's a lot of pros there. Usually when you do HIIT-based or a aerobic-based workout, not usually, but most of the time it's associated with being with friends. So there's that social interaction, which increases heaps throughout the week. It can be a much cheaper way to train. Running is free. HIIT training can be free to inexpensive. Most gyms do Saturdays for free, and they do that style of session anyway. And then you can go to a gym, Jets, Snap, whatever, and pay the gym membership $20 a week to do your weight training. So, versus coming to someone like us, it can be a lot cheaper if you just want to do all three of those things. It can virtually just cost you $15, $20 a week, which is a massive pro and lowers the barrier for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, at the same time, it's sort of, it's also, from as you mentioned, the social connection, but it's that sort of mentally, when you are doing these things, not a single one of them are easy to do. And particularly in a combination, to get through a tough week of training where you are doing 7, 8, 9 sessions, as you mentioned, there's that sense of accomplishment, which is probably the biggest thing that I know I feel if I've had a really good training week. And that, I'm sure most people, when they do a week, a second week, a third, a fourth, a fifth week consistently, they're going to feel that same sense of accomplishment. So, yeah, very interesting. Cool. So I guess from my end, from a trend perspective, I want to jump into the other end of the spectrum and go into, I guess, the menopausal woman. And there's a lot of noise on the internet right now around muscle mass and bone density and then supplementation and, the hormone changes and all that sort of thing. A lot of our clients are in this age category, if not, past it. So what are some of the things that you think, are getting said that you find yourself debunking in terms of the myths within it? And then what areas are pretty truthful and valuable?
One of the ones that I've had a lot of conversation around is frequency of training. And people always ask, how often should I train? And for me, that is a two-part question, or a two-part answer, rather. It is, what are you currently doing? And what is appropriate for right now? And then what is your actual goal? So if you can logistically, with a family and all those things, only train twice a week, put the menopause and all those things aside, because lifestyle-wise, that's all we can do right now. And then the thing that we prescribe is based on your current state and what we're going to do as step one or baby step one, rather than what's best practice, because we still have to factor in the human first. So I really like going back to frameworks all the time. And when someone comes in and says my bone density or my muscle mass, and they freak out and all those things, I'm like, I hear you, I agree fully, but you haven't exercised in 6 years. So we've got to start with learning to do a dumbbell bench press for 2 sets of 10. Irrespective of what your goal is. I would say that's the most common thing I hear and I see over and over and over again.
And it is, and it's sort of, the fear of God's thrust into their mind all of a sudden, where it's like, I haven't done this and I'm going to have this and I might just fall and completely shatter every bone if I do fall because of my bone density. It's like, whoa, okay, hang on, slow down. 1, that probably won't happen. 2, yes or no, you may or may not be at risk. At the end of the day, you need to start in the very same place that anyone would start, no matter where they are. You could have a young 20-year-old male that has never exercised. What would you start him with? The same sort of thing. So, it doesn't need to be a complete new set of exercises, sets, reps, and different names in a different language, because you're in this category as a human being in terms of your life cycle. You got to just go back to, as you said, the simple frameworks and tick the right box at the right time. And it sort of, again, links back to that skill element that, we mentioned in the hybrid sort of running, strength, everything, load management. There is still the skill of lifting weights and moving your body really well. And that is, for me, what strength training is. It's not getting stronger. It is first learning skills and then being better and better and better at that skill, so it can be done in a more complex scenario, velocity, load, volume, regardless of whether you're an All Black or 55 years old doing your first workout in 10 years. So when the industry and when the internet thrusts a bunch of noise and concern in people's head, I love it because it promotes action. But that action doesn't need to be niched into a little nuance of not doing the basics well and just trying to pick up a deadlift.
And it's silly. I had a lady who I did a consult with yesterday, and for context, we had started in November, and the first program was decrease pain, increase function, return to running, and we smashed that. That was a really good milestone. And we're in April now, and starting to get up for some races and everything. And she said, like, what exercise am I doing next? And I said, well, I'm not going to pull out this brand new set of exercises I've been reserving for this moment.
Yeah.
We're just going to keep doing what we're doing a little bit better.
Yeah.
And it was this, haha moment. But
it is. And that's it, as when we've said it all the time. If you look at a strength program for a range of elite athletes, they're going to be doing very similar exercises as what we might be doing in our Fit Over 50s class. The variation comes into the set rep, speed and volume with which they do it. And that's what a lot of people need to realize. I think you raised a good point there, though. For a lot of people in this population, pain is a factor that is inhibiting them from training and almost, contributing to a fear of, I might make it worse. And with a valid reason, you might. And that's where leaning on a practitioner that understands what they're doing and understands pain to a certain degree is really important, because pain needs to guide what you do. If you get back pain doing that squat movement or that deadlift movement, you probably don't want to double down on doing it. You want to make sure you're executing it so that you don't get pain. How often do you sort of see that hold people back? And how do you think, people that have this sort of generalized lack of confidence, pain, rather than a pure diagnostic, injury, how do you deal with them? How do you approach the framework? For example, the client you just saw yesterday.
Baby step one for me is getting a quick win. And if we talk about, let's call it any site, call it a knee, and we're trying to either extend or flex the knee or pretty much get your leg straight or bend your leg, and something causes a pain or painful position, how can you find a position that doesn't cause as much pain? And you're using a rating, 10 being excruciating, 1 being low, and ballpark 2 to 4 is like, okay, we're heading in the right direction, right? And if you can get a moment where they have a quick win, you're not changing their life, but a quick win, it lowers barriers, it builds a bit of trust, and it opens that door to go, okay, now I'm in.
Yeah, there's a solution.
There's
and
something
the momentum
here.
goes. Yeah.
How you find that quick win is like just building your toolbox up with a series of what is the hardest variation of this thing. And let's talk about the knee. It might be, for example, let's say we're doing a Nordic. That could be most extreme end of like a hamstring based exercise, right into a lying on your stomach, bending your knee, feeling your hamstring, something like that. And you just over time build your toolbox up with which one you pick at what time.
Yeah, what layer of difficulty, intensity do you want to take at the joint, the situation? I think, as you said, that positioning element's really important, because how someone hinges at the hip might make them feel their back extensors, and therefore, oh, I'm worried about my back pain. And if we can position them correctly to hinge at the hip and feel more hamstring, bang, it sort of, as you said, it gives them that confidence. They sort of, light up. And then they build their movement and their capacity, and suddenly they're doing a deadlift of their body weight in 6 to 12 months. And they could never have imagined being in that position. For 10 years they dealt with back pain, and it's understanding those little nuances, which is so valuable, and it's taking that small step. I think, from a pros and cons perspective, a couple of the notes I had in terms of pros of this, as I said, and these will always outweigh the cons. It's making people take action. This sudden understanding of longevity and, particularly females' health going through this period of time. For a long time, there was no solution. It was, you're going through it. We're just going to kind of leave you guys there and let them get through the hot flushes and the mood changes, and then hopefully they come out the other end and they're a bit more chill, which isn't a very, good way to approach it. And now it's like, let's sink our teeth into it. Let's get them moving. Let's get active. Let's deal with the the potential side effects of this sort of change hormonally, and then move into the confidence sort of area of I'm physically strong and sound and safe and all that sort of thing. So the action it's promoting is really a positive. I think other side of it is, the connection in the community through our women's health program. We've seen it already. They're actually stepping back into gyms and social environments where they actually have a bit more of a senior role, and they can actually share their lessons with the younger women, from relationships through to their body and their physical changes, and seeing them connect and actually have that sort of role within female communities and male communities. I think we've got probably about 8 gym mums within SOF that are going through this period in their life, and in some way, shape or form they have that role with us, with our other staff, and with the rest of the members here. They make sure everyone has a coffee, and they ask those questions, which is really unique to the culture and the environment. So having them involved is really special for us. And then I think the other one is the rest of us are talking about it from a pro. We're all understanding that, hey, this is a very important part of life, and we can have a better understanding and therefore a better respect, and ultimately help and have a better connection and community with the women in our lives that are going through these physical changes. And then from a con perspective that I'd say, I think it's just the big one is, I guess, the fear that it can trigger, and that sort of evolving anxiety of, I'm not strong enough, I've got bad bone density, I haven't taken care of myself, and I need to buy all these supplements, and all of a sudden it becomes a bit of a marketing ploy in terms of, let's leverage on the vulnerable and the weak, and here's a population that are going to buy and say and do anything. As we said, from a strength and a training perspective, it's very basic. That for me is probably the major con. Outside of that, I don't really have too many others. I don't know if there's anything that comes to your mind.
No, I genuinely can't think of a con, and I know I'm biased when I look at it, but the programs get such good feedback, irrespective if we ran the program or anyone ran the program. It's just the fact that they're around people 3-4 times a week, they're training 3-4 times a week, they're having coffee. Like, there's so much good stuff in that.
Yeah, it's totally worth investing in, and just taking that plunge for any woman that's in this situation in your life. If it is scary, go and do it. Go and just take that plunge. Go in gently. Don't expect too much of yourself, and also stand up for yourself. You're going, hey, that looks a little bit out of my comfort zone. Can we regress that, be it in a class or whatever situation? And the practitioners generally will go, yeah, no worries, and they'll be able to cater for you. Cool. Let's mix it up and we'll roll on. Your current training, mate. You've been doing a bit of bloody everything. If anyone follows Joey on social media, talk us through the last kind of 4 weeks. What have you done? What are the big ones you've done? And then what does the sort of training schedule look like?
Yeah. So for a bit of backstory, I always like to start the year intense with training. I always try and choose a little event to do. This sort of happened 2 years ago, and I've just like to roll on from there. So this year I decided, I wrote out my goals for the year and what I wanted to do. And I don't normally write physical ones down because I always do something. But I said, no, this year I'm going to write some physical goals down. So, I wrote down I want to do 4 jiu-jitsu fights, matches, tournaments, whatever. I want to do 1 boxing fight, which I've always wanted to do. And in the back end of the year, there's like some running stuff that eventually that I'll get to, but I wanted to tick off the martial arts ones first. So far I've done 2 jiu-jitsu comps, came second both, first time loser on both of them, but no, second both times, which is cool. I've got a boxing match in a fortnight now, so on the 23rd of April, which I'm seriously worried and excited about at the same time. And that's my sort of Q1, Q2 goals. And then once that finishes up, I'm going to tone it down a bit and try and eat more food and put on some more muscle mass and become a hybrid.
Become more hybrid.
Yeah.
All right. That's one pretty ambitious and pretty big that you've ticked those 1, 2, nearly 3 things off. What does the training look like, and how much has your training changed in shooting for those?
Yeah. So normally I would do 3 weights a week, sometimes 4. I would do a class or 2. And I would do a jiu-jitsu session and a boxing session. So call it 6 sessions a week, pretty religiously. At the moment, I'm doing 3 jiu-jitsu, 3 boxing, 1 to 2 running, 1 to 2 classes, and consistently 2 gym, sometimes 3. So call it 10 to 12 sessions a week, plus a yoga or something else in there. So, a decent increase. The only catch to this is all the martial arts sessions are hard. There's not that there's no technical element. There's a tremendous amount of technical, but every session finishes with 30 minutes of hard work. So it's kind of like you're almost redlining 6 to 8 sessions a week. So the fatigue element is unreal.
Yeah, I was going to say, how's that feeling? What are you noticing?
So before the first match about a month ago, on top of the world, amazing, like genuinely amazing. After that, had a week of semi-soreness, like a 6 out of 10 soreness. After the week, ate more food, went away, no dramas. And the gear up to the second comp, I had to drop a little bit more weight. So I normally sit about 83. I went down to 78 for the first one. I went down to 77 for the second one. Only a kilo, but 2 weeks. I've just been like so sore, so tired, demotivated to train, all those things. But like, I know that the thing's coming up in a fortnight. So it's like, I just got to keep chipping. I've increased my food. I've taken 2 sessions down a week. I'm eating like heaps. I'm eating the most amount of protein I've ever eaten. I'm still just dropping body fat, But the motivation isn't there to do hard stuff. But because it's in the schedule, locked in, and I've got the fight.
Yeah.
Like it's happening.
Yeah.
If I wasn't fighting,
no backing out.
There's no backing out. So that's been a really interesting thing, and it's given me a much bigger appreciation for training for events. I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago on Instagram. Training for events, I've never really been a huge fan for, but it's been, 12 sessions a week since January, hard, and, visually, I'm in one of the better shapes I've been in some time. So, yeah.
Yeah, bit of a lesson in that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, I guess from my side, training wise, I've been, I wouldn't say in polar opposite to that, but certainly by my standard, nowhere near where I guess I've typically trained at. So, my typical breakdown would be one primal class, which is a really hard, high intensity, body weight only session that we run here on a Monday. I'll generally try and lift 3 to 4 times a week, strength sessions, and then hopefully another high intensity interval that's variable, same as the 4th strength one, and then at least 1 run, preferably 2. Since the start of the year, just loaded myself up with work, which is, an excuse. Mainly it is an excuse. You can always find time to train is my rule. But yeah, it's sort of been, okay, sneak in a primal if you can. There's been occasions where I've had, other sessions on and whatnot, but managed to maintain that. That's a gun at the head and I love it and it's never going to go away. And then navigating getting the strength training in has been really interesting because one, you do a primal on a Monday night, you're sore Tuesday. It's easy to say, oh, I'm sore. I trained last night. It's fine. And generally on a Sunday, I'll go and, really cash in as much time strength training as I can because I've got time. But yeah, just having to change that. So in the last month, I've really gone with this approach of let's stick with that Monday high intensity exposure. And then I've shifted to 30-minute strength sessions because I found 60 minutes was kind of just a waste of time. And so then if I didn't have the time, I wouldn't fit it in. So then I was missing sessions and then you feel like a piece of shit for missing sessions. So then I was like, okay, let's double down on making sure I get these strength exposures in. And I've just dialed in on what is now a 30-minute strength session. And it's crazy the difference it makes. So I'm doing 2, if not 3 of those a week. And then making sure I run at least once a week because, last year I took, ran did a half marathon, as you said, training for an event, and just took running to a whole nother level for myself where I'm like, I'm never going to go back from that. And that for me is being able to do a 10K at a, 4:45, sub that pace. And so, for me, the goal now is to, whilst I'm really busy, not get worse. And that's kind of been my attitude this year is I was in a really good place last year from a training perspective. I haven't got any worse and I've been training a lot less, which has been really interesting. So, I can still go out and, I'm not going to do a 4:20 10K, which I once did, but sitting under that 4:45 threshold if I need to from a running perspective. And then from a lifting perspective, my key numbers are being able to back squat about 1.75 body weight for 10. That's kind of my goal. And then it's same as a bench press, being able to do, again, about 1.2 of body weight for 10. There's just a couple of basic numbers which I'm making sure I don't let slip. And as a result, the high volume, high intensity strength training that I'm doing has had a really amazing influence on kind of how I'm feeling from a soreness perspective. When last year or the year before, I was really trying to hit the maximal strength stuff. But I found my body just didn't love it. I was aching in the knees and the shoulders and probably in the place that you're in now. But as a result, I've dialed back on the load, kept the volume, kept the intensity to 90-second rest maximum between any set. And yeah, you can just churn through your 30-minute strength sessions. So I'll do a full breakdown of what that looks like in an episode at one point. But for particularly the male out there that is busy, kids, family, whatever else is going on, and you only have a small window to do your training, this for me is the secret sauce, because it's kept everything where it was at its peak for me, and I haven't gotten much worse, and I have not trained half as much as I typically would and I'd typically like to. So really interesting sort of period from a training perspective, but got some things in the pipeline to see if that changes soon. So
it's really interesting. I think from experience training people, guys, once they hit 30 right up to probably about 50, respond really well to the intensity and less so the volume. And, if there's someone out there smarter than me, you can, back that up with something. I'd love to see it. I'm sure you've got something banked up. And, you mentioned the accomplishment factor of feeling good. You've mentioned the volume factor of, walking around with your bum being a bit sore from, Bulgarian split squatting or something. But I do find that a set of 10, 8, 6 will work a lot better than 5x5 or something like that in this period where work's busy, life's busy, people might have kids, family, whatever. So just a bit of food for thought there.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And more than anything, like 30 minutes is enough. You can find 30 minutes. Anyone can find 30 minutes a couple of times a week. That's pretty easy, particularly if you just put your iPhone down. Righto, cool. To wrap it up, mate, let's bring it home. One big lesson from the last month, could be in business, could be in training yourself, could be in training your clients. What's the big one for you?
Yeah, look, I'm going to go staff for this one. And where we're currently at is we've got a lot of really good people in our team. And what I often forget is a lot of us are trainers first, managers, business people, marketers, whatever. That's not our primary role. And I always have to catch myself thinking that, because training people for me I love it. It's second nature. I could look at the whiteboard once and be like, cool, I remember everything, let's roll. But setting direction, following up, giving advice, giving feedback is still something I need a lot of work on, and the entire team team does rather. So, for me, we're a team of, younger staff who are newer to the industry. There's a few people who aren't born in Australia. So culturally, there's some differences. There's people who have come across from different companies. Is making sure that we are clearer and clearer and clearer and clearer all the time, which has been my biggest lesson.
Yeah, and clear in particular to who we are, what we do, why we do it as a brand.
As well as, this is how things should be done. This is how the session should be delivered. This is the music that is most appropriate, using parameters or brackets. So, here are some options to choose between, and just giving more direction before you give creative freedom or creative license. If you rewind a few years ago, I always thought, no, give them creative freedom. They'll love it. But analysis paralysis went on, and you overthought, when a lot of the feedback I'm getting personally is give me direction, give me parameters, and give me things to, play between, which has been a really interesting lesson for me.
Yeah, that's a big lesson in staff. I think for me, and it references back to my training, it is in training, and it is when you're busy, you don't have to let the physicality or the training element go to the side. And as I said, it's just reconsidering what you're doing, and there's so many other levers you can pull on, particularly in a training sense, that you can get as much value out from your zone 2 to your cardio, to your strength, and to everything else. I'm almost annoyed at how inefficiently I trained for the last 3, 4, 5 years, because what I'm doing in a third of the time is getting very similar outcomes. So that for me is going, okay, from an efficiency perspective, there is a lever there that you can pull. And then if you do have the luxury of training and having time with your training, what are you doing? Because if it's not making significant improvements, you need to be considering your work and how hard you are working, when you are working, and don't waste time, because that's the commodity that is more valuable than anything else in the world. Be more hard on your time when you are training so you can get more out of it. That's probably my main lesson for anyone that's keen on the old training side of things.
No, that's good. I fully agree. And for people who don't know your training cycle, I think you've been Mr. Consistent for a long, long, long time. So you do have to earn that right. But where you're at now, you've got a position where you can really turn up the dial and essentially get the same benefits. So it's a good lesson in being committed and being consistent, and then having the luxury of having the ability to dial it up.
Yep, in a shorter time frame, which almost sounds contradictory, but yeah, it's possible. Awesome. Sweet, mate. Thank you very much. Well, I'll put this out to the listeners. Jump on our social media if you've got any question that you want to ask into these. We'll start doing a little bit of a Q&A in and around these podcasts here, just both within the business lessons, and then obviously training, which is the thing we're most stoked about or most into. And then the other thing, which is a sort of new project that we've been working on for a little while now, is the Science of Fitness School program. So for those that don't know what school is, it is an online learning platform. And we essentially just have had people move away and train with us and observe us from other states, cities and whatever, and they just wanted to know a little bit more about what we do, why we do it, how it all sort of works, from exercise prescription to injury and all that sort of thing from a programming perspective. So we've got a range of content up there and available, but if you just jump on the SOF School program, you can look us up online. You can go to our social media and just jump on. We've set that up to be now free to anybody, so anyone can sign up, join the community, interact with the community, send us messages. We're doing, as I said, a whole lot of online learning content. We're doing online sort of workshops and that sort of thing as well. So a really exciting space that's coming up for us, and something to keep your eyes out. Joey, thank you very much once again, mate. We'll catch you in 4 weeks' time, mate, and we'll go again.
See you in May, brother.
Beauty. Thanks, mate.